Now, talks on a potential peace deal to end the war in Ukraine have just started in Saudi Arabia, and that's just a day after European leaders met to discuss their role in deterring Russia in future.
Well, Ukraine's president says it's time for a European army to protect the region's security, and a new poll shows almost half of Brits would be in favour of the UK taking part, while 28% are against the idea. So should British troops join if a European army is created? Well, here to discuss is former Reform UK Director of Communications, Garraway, who argues it will never happen and young people won't want to fight, and former British Army officer Justin Crump, who believes it is a good idea to have a European unit that operates together. Good morning to you
both.
Good morning. Justin, shall I start with you in that case? I mean, bearing in mind the situation we're in at the moment, actually, this seems like a prospect that we will have to seriously consider. Sir Keir Starmer has said peacekeeping troops could be sent from the UK, but that would rely on other people. So is it time then to have a sort of official European army to be able to support that?
I think the point is, I mean, we can't engage on military operations above a very limited scale on our own. You know, we know the armed forces are run down. We're not the imperial power of yore. You know, we're going to have to work with others, as we have often throughout history, to get things done. I think the call for a European army is a bit of a misnomer. People hear that and think we're talking about a European army instead of a British army, and you'd wear a European badge and you'd stand when Beethoven is played. And it's not like that. It's this call for a European joint force that can operate more closely together, make up for each other's deficiencies and be stronger together than we are individually as nations, and much easier for our adversaries to pick off. So I think that's what's being talked about.
OK, but it's beset with improbables, isn't it? I mean, how, for example, would Germany behave in such an arrangement? We know Germany's a historic relationship with the army and how they now feel about it. I mean, they're not going to be a major player, are they?
I think Germany's, really increased its defence spending and stepped up. It's a controversial issue because the budget issues related to that have brought down their government. So it didn't go entirely well. But, I mean, Germany has actually one of the nations that's moved towards rearming more than many. And they'd certainly declined far more than the UK had. Actually, the British Army was based in Germany up until about 2017, when my old regiment was the last to leave. We've kept training areas there. We still have logistic facilities there. And I think we probably wish at this point we'd left a lot more in Germany, actually, because our assessment of the world back then obviously has changed in 10 years to the point...
Yeah, but cynics are going to say to you, look, if Britain and France, two of the big players in Europe militarily, if Britain and France can't even stop rubber boats coming over the Channel, what hope can they possibly have of forming a proper, effective, unified fighting alliance? Well,
we have this within NATO. I think the problem is, and we've done this for 80 years, really, the problem we have is that NATO without the US isn't NATO. The US provides really critical capabilities across NATO: satellites, communications, computerized warfare, things like this. And, of course, the bulk of the force. Now, we've still got about half the force outside of the US, but we're now in a world where the mission that the US seems to want us to do in Ukraine won't have the US involved, maybe as a backstop, maybe the US Air Force to help. But we can't rely on the US coming to our defence anymore. So if the US doesn't turn up, and all of our plans hedge around the fact the US will turn up, that is not the time to be coming up with a plan B. So I think you need to have this ability now to operate
to be able to put it in place. OK, Gawain, let's go over to you. In that case, that's sort of the case for a European army.
I can see the poll you're talking about is interesting, without doubt. But I can see if we get ourselves into a position where we are in a European NATO without America, we are acting as a peacekeeper in the Ukraine, in whatever deal they come up with. I don't believe the Russians won't take a pop just to see what happens. Because without America there, the NATO mutual defence thing seems to have gone out the window because the Americans aren't there. I believe that if they take a pop at British forces out there, within 2 days of the first few British servicemen dying, that poll changes and it collapses. And the British support for British peacekeepers in the Ukraine dies when the first British soldiers die.
And if we then the European forces to be together to have a united front, though.
But you need the political support of the populations of Europe. If Western European soldiers start dying in the Ukraine, that popular support that you see in a single poll evaporates.
We have seen...
And then what happens?
We saw yesterday a very dusty response from the German Chancellor, who left the meetings early, basically to say it's far too soon to talk about this. So there's a long way to go before we're going to get any kind of agreement. What about his point, and many people have been saying this, what if we do end up running a peacekeeping operation in Ukraine in the next few weeks or months, depending on what the deal is? And Russia, he's right, does take a pop. And suddenly we find ourselves toe-to-toe with Russia.
Well, and this is the risk for any of this. I mean, what's the alternative? There's do nothing, give up, and then they'll come anyway and take a pop at something. And I think the issue we're in at this point is we've allowed things to slide over a period of affluence since the end of the Cold War. Our adversaries didn't forget the way that ended. They have nibbled away at us. They've continually probed us. We've had a failure of policy really since 2014, and we failed to deter them. I mean, eventually we have to do that. We have to take the stand. We have to show that we're capable, because the longer you leave it, the more expensive it gets.
Who'd command it? Who'd be in charge?
I think a general opinion at the moment, certainly the NATO sort of plan that was pulled out of a hat around all this actually has the UK in command of the force in Ukraine.
Why would the French and the Italians and the Germans be happy with that, given that we've left Europe?
I'm not saying that's a done deal, but I think at the moment it's because the Allied Rapid Reaction Corps is a NATO headquarters that's based in this country. It's based just outside Gloucester, and it's the natural formation for this within NATO. But again, you have a problem. It's a NATO headquarters. Will Russia put up with the idea of a NATO headquarters, even if it's called something else, sitting in Kyiv commanding NATO troops?
Well, I think
when they went to war not to have NATO, yeah. So there's a lot of discussion here. I mean, this is very early stage. A lot of this is signalling. But I think what's without doubt is, we need to draw a line eventually with our adversaries. We've lost our biggest supporter, arguably, or it's tenuous now, the commitment of the support from the US. And the longer we leave it, the more expensive it will get. So if we keep kicking this can down the road, as we have done, eventually you get to a point where...
You've told us what you wouldn't do. What would you do?
Because, on the point of there being no alternative, if we don't do this, then what happens? We can't just sit back and let nothing happen.
That the best thing we can do right now is, whilst we understand that America's more focused on China than it is on Europe, and understandably, if you're Americans, that makes more sense for you, we still have some capacity at not letting them fly off as far as they seem to want to right now. I would be making our diplomatic work. I would be doing all we could to keep the Americans engaged, rather than saying, OK, they're done, we're going to set up an army with the Polish and the Portuguese. We need... Our diplomatic efforts should not be on giving up on America, in fact, maintaining the Americans' engagement.
What's your sense of that? Do you think there's any wiggle room here at all with Trump? Because he seems to be being pretty clear that as far as he's concerned, it's over. Our reliance on America is a done deal. It's finished.
I mean, his statements can change. I think we know this. And his deal-making is a certain style. I think we are in a new paradigm in the relation with the US. I don't think it's a different style, but the US is fundamentally the same. I think the US has changed its view. We're in a world of power, where power matters. He's a power player, and we're seeing that in these talks. But the UK, actually, in particular, is in a position to bridge, and this is what Keir Starmer's been talking about. We can bridge that gap with the Americans, keep things closer together. But I think the NATO guarantee that the US is committed to the defence of the European continent is not cast iron at this point, and that will tempt our adversaries. So we must have a plan for that.
I think there's one difference to that. The NATO guarantee is a guarantee to NATO members. Ukraine is not a NATO member. That guarantee to NATO members, if there was an attack on Estonia, America would be there.
So that's a big sticking point, isn't it? OK, listen, thank you both. We'll have to draw it to a close there, but we appreciate you taking part. And should we take a look? Because we asked you if you'd support UK troops joining a European army. Let's see the result of our poll. 26% said yes and 74% said no. And that's quite a big difference, isn't it, from that YouGov poll, which showed that 46% of the public supported the creation of a European army.
Shows public opinion is very, very, very wobbly at the moment. Nobody knows quite what to think. We're in uncharted waters, aren't we? We really are.